Hey guys, welcome to another Kiksta review. So today I'm going to be reviewing The Flash, the latest film starring Ezra Miller with Michael Keaton. It's about obviously the DC character The Flash. I saw it the other night and I'm going to give my full non-spoiler review of the film with my spoiler review to follow in a couple days time. So I'm going to give you my initial thoughts to start, then I'll break down some things about the story and characters, obviously from a non-spoiler perspective, and then we'll just go from there. So starting off, my general thoughts about this film is I thought it was fine. It was actually better than I expected it to be. I had pretty low expectations, not the lowest, but pretty low. And I thought it was better than that in most regards. So I think the main thing about this film that impressed me was that it actually has a heart. Like, it's not just a shallow film. Yes, there's a lot of nostalgia bait and a lot of things that just try and get kind of easy jumps out of the crowd and whatnot, but out of the audience. But really, it does have an emotional core to it, mainly about Barry Allen, the Flash's mother, and him wanting to basically turn back time to save her. This is not a spoiler, this is in the trailers. The story is pretty fine. It's nothing special. It's just kind of a simple sort of time travel story, really. I think the things about the story overall, just as I give this kind of brief picture before I dig into it, is that one of the things that did bother me about this film is that it's a bit too jokey at times. You know, it suffers from that same sort of MCU trope where they try to make a joke out of everything and sort of undercut serious moments with just a dumb joke at the end of it. So that bothered me as something that I didn't like about the film, but otherwise I generally like the film for the most part. So starting off with the story, as I mentioned, this is a time travel story, so it is fairly reminiscent of Back to the Future, not just because it has time travel, but also because it is kind of a personal sort of time travel story where it's literally about saving his mum and his dad, I guess, of sorts. So it's kind of similar in that regard to Back to the Future. Has a lot of the same beats as well, where it kind of draws on the humor of interacting with your parents and yourself even in that regard. So obviously Barry meets other Barry, this is in the trailer, and who's a younger version of himself, and they, set off on an adventure together based on the circumstances, because obviously when they change time, brings back his mom, which is great, but then sets off a chain of other unfortunate events that they have to go around solving. And so without giving too much away about the plot, it is hinted at in the trailer that Zod is the main villain. He is the villain. I won't get too much into how that works and exactly how it looks and all that sort of thing, but he is the main villain. And obviously, this is a universe where there's no Justice League, the Justice League that he knows and remembers, but it's got some of the Justice League characters, but obviously it's different ones. The main one being obviously Michael Keaton's Batman, who is great. He's probably my favorite part of this film by far. And then you also got Sasha Calle's Supergirl, who is kind of obviously she's in the trailers too, and she kind of comes into the fold later on in the film. So yeah, there is this kind of aspect of kind of the Flash building trying to find his own Justice League team to take on Zod, but I won't go more into it than that in terms of story, because I think if I do go into it, it'll just get too spoilery, and I just don't want to do that in this particular video. My thoughts overall on the story is that it was solid. It didn't do a lot for me. I think it was more the emotional aspect that was keeping me engaged rather than the actual plot elements that were enticing me. It was more, it's just more about seeing the emotional beats and the more serious moments that were keeping me going. Obviously when he finally meets Michael Keaton's Batman, that clicks it into another gear. I felt the movie just kind of went to another level at that point, which was great. And it's story-wise, it's very simplistic. I think it's passable as a story. I wouldn't recommend it as the kind of plot. I think this obviously gets away with it in certain regards because of things like nostalgia and a bit of humor here and there to just kind of help. And obviously the heart, as I mentioned. If they didn't have these elements working as well as they did, then I think it would fall pretty flat. So yeah, look, the story I think is passable as a time travel story. It is very simplistic and doesn't try to go for too much, which is kind of a shame because it's Flash. It should be pretty ambitious. The CGI this is not really story aspect, but they use the CGI as a form of storytelling, but it works in some instances, but for the most part the CGI is absolutely shocking in this film, and I kind of knew that and I expected that going in, so it was not a big surprise. And for me, it didn't take away too much because I was still invested enough to just keep going along, and because I knew the CGI wasn't going to be great, I was willing to just kind of look past it and just be like, okay. And you know, this film also went through development hell, so that's just another layer that I'm willing to forgive somewhat. So yeah, look, the CGI was shocking, but didn't really take away for me. As for the characters, so obviously starting off, main characters, Barry Allen. Ezra Miller as Flash, look, I know he's not the Flash of the comics. He is this own version of Flash that they've made in the movies. And for what he is and what they intend him to be, I think he does a good job of it. It's not... and there's obviously 2 Barrys in this film, so it's double the amount of Ezra Miller. So if you don't like Ezra Miller, you're not going to like this movie. Definitely not. So, but if you accept this version of the Flash, then there's fun to be had with it, and I think he does a decent job for the most part. I don't feel Ezra Miller's really got that like leading man kind of persona. He's more of that kind of quirky sidekick. I think that's kind of his best sort of role, and that's what he has been basically in the DC universe to this point. And I felt he works better in that Justice League scenario, kind of playing off the more main characters. But now, where he's the main one and you got kind of Batman and Supergirl almost as his sidekicks, feels a bit off dynamic-wise. You just feel like they should be the more leading people in this scenario. But I guess the way they kind of explain it is that, you know, he's the one who's obviously aware of the situation, that time has gone out of control due to his mistake, and so they're kind of, I guess, deferring to him in that regard. I won't say what they do and don't do, but just, yeah, it's basically, that's how they kind of justify him being the leader. So yeah, look, I think as Barry in this film, I think he was fine, better than I expected, and especially because I don't really like Ezra Miller from his personal side of things, which I'm not going to get into. But yeah, I think he was fairly good as the main character, or the main 2 characters. And so my favorite character was Michael Keaton's Batman. I think he was just awesome. Like, it was so great. You know, I love the original Batman and Batman Returns movies, but they are kind of dated at this point. You know, in terms of the action and stuff like that, you rewatch them now, they're great movies, but the action is dated. So it was really awesome to see Keaton's Batman in this modern day with modern technology and stuntmen and all the stuff and choreography. Just so cool to see him in that regard, and with the Batwing and all these sorts of things. So I thought he was my favorite part of the movie by far. And whilst I didn't like the way that they introduce him in the film, there's a scene that takes place where in a kitchen, I'm not going to say what happens really, but I didn't like how they introduced him. But once he shows up in the suit, he's awesome from then on. And I thought they did some fun things with his character throughout. Doesn't really add too much to his character. You know, I would compare this kind of film to Spider-Man No Way Home in terms of how they've introduced him in this one, but I felt like Spider-Man No Way Home, they did a good job of actually adding to Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, whereas this one, it does a good job of honoring his character, but I don't feel it added much more to him. You don't really learn too much more about his situation. He really is just in there predominantly for nostalgia bait, but also just to kind of kick the plot along and just to, you know, to be Batman and just kick ass, basically. The other character that I was actually pleasantly surprised by was Sasha Calle's Supergirl. So I was surprised in a couple of respects. One, that she's not really in the film as much as I thought she would be. She's mainly there in the 3rd act, but on this other side of things, I thought she was just well done. I was kind of expecting the worst with her character. I thought they would just make her way too overpowered and way too girl bossy and whatnot, but she's cool. She's cool in it. She goes for it with her role. She shows her softer side, she shows her more angry side. She's got it all going on. So yeah, I thought she was really good, and she was the most surprising aspect of the film. You know, whilst Keaton's Batman I loved the most, but I was kind of expecting that with him, whereas hers was just a pleasant surprise. So that was a nice addition, I thought, in this film. So those are the main characters I enjoyed, you know, which I think is the most important ones because they are the most main characters of the film. But then I'd have to say the side of the film with the characters that I didn't feel were handled the best was one, Zod. I think is completely underdeveloped in this film. I'm not gonna, if I go into that more, I will do that more in my spoiler, because if I do it now, it will ruin it definitely. The other one is obviously Flash's parents, so Barry Allen's mum in particular. I felt they didn't have enough screen time with her. Whilst they still managed to get the emotional side of the film pretty right, I felt there was potential for so much more if they just had more of her in the film, because she's really only there at the beginning and kind of at the end. It's not really, not too much there. I hope that's not a spoiler, but yeah, that's just is what it is. The other thing is what I just call a character is the cameos. So I'm not going to say what the cameos are in this film, no spoilers there, but there is a ton of just little flashes of things here and there. To me, they completely missed the mark. I don't consider Michael Keaton's Batman a cameo. He's not a cameo. He is a full-on character in this film. But the cameos in this film really missed the mark. Completely unnecessary. Completely just did nothing to the film. Like, they just, if you don't know these characters, they're just completely meaningless people appearing on the screen. But they're just trying to trust that the audience will enjoy this enough as an Easter egg just to get a pop out of them. But I can't really see many audiences getting a pop out of this because they're just really meaningless and shallow. So I thought that was really silly, and most of them happen obviously in the third act. So I'm not going to say when exactly or who they are, but it's just they weren't done right. It's a shame because I think we're kind of over the whole nostalgia bait at this point and just throwing characters in for the sake of it. I think we're past that. It would have worked 5-10 years ago, but not anymore. I think people are over it, and I certainly am too. So overall, I thought it was a decent film. I enjoyed it. My brain was kind of switched off for a lot of it, so I think I was able to enjoy it more that way, and particularly because I didn't have high expectations going in. I would be curious to know what people's thoughts are who did have high expectations or were really just geared into the story at every turn. I was, just laying back and just soaking it in, enjoying it for what it was, and that's why I think it did pleasantly surprise me. The emotional side is really what surprised me the most and what I wasn't expecting to get from this film. So that was just nice, and it's something I'm willing to accept, even if it means at the sacrifice of some story. So that was nice, and so my overall thoughts is I'd give this just a straight up 7 out of 10. No, I think definitely above average, a good film, fairly decent, but and just a fun kind of popcorn flick really, with some cool action sequences. Don't expect much from the CGI, but yeah. Anyways, that's my full non-spoiler review. I'll be releasing my spoiler review in a couple days time. So if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button and post your comments in the comment section below, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.